One of my primary messaging, though, is that I want kids to see a therapist like they see the dentist, which is at least twice a year. And we don't wait for our teeth to fall out before we go. Like, we go twice, they check them, they clean them, they take x-rays, they tell us how to improve them. And maybe we come back for a little bit more treatment if we need some work. So really using that analogy with kids, something that they're so familiar with that they've done twice a year since they were little, helps them understand the concept of whole health.
Welcome to Tad Voices. I'm Nick.
And I'm Lawson, and we're friends and former teammates who are here to talk about mental health.
We are by no means experts in this field, nor is this a substitute for professional help, but we can promise open and vulnerable conversations that highlight the strength of some amazing people who have decided to share their story with us.
Talk, share, help. And thanks for listening. Today, we are very excited to be joined by Daniel Patterson. With nearly 20 years of experience in education, Daniel offers support to adolescents, parents, and educators through his consulting firm, Patterson Perspective. He holds a master's degree in education, has been featured on national platforms such as MSNBC, The HuffPost, and NBC News, and is also the published author of Recover and The Assertive Parent. Traveling regularly to deliver impactful and informative presentations on topics such as teenage mental health and substance abuse, we welcome to the podcast, Daniel Patterson.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Daniel, it's a true pleasure to have you on. And first and foremost, how you doing? How's sort of getting back into the swing of things? Obviously, with children, right? Hopefully, back in school a little bit. How have the past 6 months sort of treated you here?
It's, one day at a time. It's been wild, to be honest. I have 3 kids, 9, 5, and 3. So it has been, a very interesting experience, and also made me realize how fortunate I am to be an entrepreneur and do my own thing so that I have that flexibility and autonomy to be able to scale back or stay home or drop off or pick up. But, from my own mental health perspective, it's been some of the hardest months of my life, to be honest with you. Within the last 6 years since I got sober.
And I think that's probably a great place to lead into. So my first question for you, or maybe not even a question, but just if you kind of like to walk us through your personal journey, your own struggles with depression and anxiety, and maybe how that ultimately led you to create positive change through education.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I struggled with anxiety and depression from a very early age. I just didn't know, it had no name, I didn't know what to call it. I grew up in a rural community. I'm 41 years old, so it just didn't have the footprint or the title or the resources that it does now. So I was a high performer, did well in school, varsity sports, college admissions, did all of the right things in a sort of white knuckle capacity. And the lack of coping skills or just sort of processing trauma I had experienced, or just learning how to live with anxiety and depression, dovetailed into a college experience that was, fun for all of the wrong reasons, and very hard. And I was very fortunate to get out of that season. And so I felt called to and committed to always, working with kids. And I became a teacher, and I taught for 10 years. And then I became an assistant principal and did that for 4 years. And then in 2015, I was really, digging in deep to my mental health, doing a lot of work with therapy, doing EMDR, doing some just, doing heavy work. And at that point, I decided to get completely sober, though I don't have like a sexy story as far as that's concerned. But I just decided that that was not benefiting my mental health. And things were going well. I started writing for the Huffington Post, and I was sort of moving along through life. And then my best friend, who I had worked with for 11 years, died by suicide unexpectedly. and I took a leave of absence from my job as an assistant principal, a job I had thought I would do forever, and I never went back. So 2016 to now, I've been writing books, speaking, and then consulting for Therapeutic schools, one high school program and one college program.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. And, I think sort of my next question is, diving a little bit deeper into your mental health journey. Could you take us through sort of what your support system has been like, how you've used therapy or a counselor, or any other, sort of steps that you've taken that have been beneficial to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think early on, when I was still in the, I wanted my mental health to be better, but I wasn't ready to put in the work. I was more of just give me some medicine and then I'm just going to keep going with the rest of my life. All systems go, right? So thinking it would be a magic bullet for me, I can take this pill and be better. Quickly realized that was not a winning solution. So I actually worked with the same therapist, a woman named Jessica, who saved my life, changed my life. And I met with her for almost weekly for about a decade, to be honest, from 2005 to 2015. And then certainly with the sobriety piece, AA has been really important to me and something that's provided me with a sense of community. Because the thing with mental health and addiction, I think, from my perspective, is it's still, as much as we talk about it more, there's an undeniable shame with it. And when I, started to understand that so many people to my left and to my right, and people I admired and people I had known for a long time, were also sort of suffering in silence, or they had found community, those ingredients have helped me maintain, a healthy life, although it takes work every day. You have to be intentional every day, or at least I do, to put my best foot forward.
I want to probably first and foremost thank you. I know just being able to take your own experiences and your own personal struggles, and then I'm sure what must have been a very difficult time in your life with the passing of a close friend, but using that to using those experiences to ultimately to help others. And I think it's people like yourself who are the reason why things are kind of whether it be, we're not definitely where we need to be yet, I'll say,
Right.
but from people like yourself who are doing very important work and making sure that it's at the forefront of discussion. So just right off the bat, I'd really just like to say thank you for that. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and then I just going off that, if I'm correct, so you do quite a few presentations at
Right.
schools, correctly, within high schools. So
Yeah.
for someone who's attending one of your presentations, who's sitting there, if you could leave a student with maybe one message who's exiting your meeting, what would be the most important piece of info that you'd like them to take from that experience listening to you?
I mean, generally when I speak, I tell, the longer version of my story, and I just try to really, hammer it, down to the fact that, your life in high school and your life in 20 years from now can be exponentially different, either better or worse, right? It's all about how our daily actions. One of my primary messaging, though, is that I want kids to see a therapist like they see the dentist, which is at least twice a year. And we don't wait for our teeth to fall out before we go. Like, we go twice, they check them, they clean them, they take x-rays, they tell us how to improve them. And maybe we come back for a little bit more treatment if we need some work. So really using that analogy with kids, something that they're so familiar with that they've done twice a year since they were little, helps them understand the concept of whole health. I did a presentation today for 30 high school students in LA. Over Zoom, we had a town hall, and it was fascinating just unpacking and discussing with them the trends that they're noticing amongst their peers and within themselves during this time of isolation, and sort of a stripped down sense of identity. And so really another core message is that we are such a product focused society, and we produce a lot of one trick ponies, right? I mean, I was a tennis player, played tennis in high school, I played tennis in college, I was a tennis coach. But a lot of our kids specialize or over specialize in things. And now we're in a season where many schools, there are no sports, or they're not acting in the plays. So they're having this existential moment where who am I without my resume? And the best person to help you walk through that is as a trained clinician, somebody who can be confidential and who can walk you and guide you through that very confusing time that even as an adult, I suffer from every day.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a really important part. And I mean, I know I've dealt with it during this pandemic, but that sense of value or that sense of belonging, like you wake up every day and no matter what's going on prior to COVID-19, somebody was going to wake up a actress or a tennis player or
Right.
a piano player, right? And
Right.
they knew that they had that consistent thing in their lives that they, okay, maybe I missed the school bus, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm going to play piano today.
Right.
But losing that value, I mean, that's huge, right? Like, how do you fill the void? Like, how would you respond to, I mean, I know you're not, and maybe I'm wrong, you're not a trained counselor or therapist,
Right.
but from your experience background giving presentations, what would you say to somebody who's like, I'm missing some value right now?
Well, I think that we are missing value. That's the common denominator. I work privately with coaching clients. I coach adolescents and young, specifically like my most emerging market right now is college students who have gone off to college and they're really struggling to figure out who they are. You don't need to know who you are in this moment, right? You just need to know how to get through this season and position yourself to, find who you are. So when I'm talking to kids, it's more about utilizing healthy coping skills as opposed to self-medicating. Like, for example, you're more likely to figure out who you are by watching a TED Talk than playing 90 minutes of an Xbox. Or you're likely to find out who you are by contributing virtually to like a political campaign that you may or may not be interested in, but you're learning a ton than, just, vaping in your car in your parking lot when your parents are on their own Zoom calls. So concept of self-care and just understanding the importance of not getting so focused on social media as the comparison point for how others are doing. Because when I know what frustrates me right now is if you look at social media and I'm playing the same game often on my feed, things look great. That's not always how they are in real life. So patience, and also this is a time of reckoning, a time of reconsidering, where you've been putting your time, talent, and energy. And if you want to keep doing those things, assuming that eventually we get back to more of a traditional way of doing life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. I mean, a lot of the times we're not, people aren't necessarily posting about their bad days on Instagram, right? It's like the highlight reel of our lives, and trying to continuously compare ourselves to other people's highlight reels. I think that that can certainly weigh on individuals, especially, an adolescent or someone who is in kind of in the formative years of their life for sure. But just kind of going back to the point you made about finding kind of not necessarily your purpose, but finding out more about who you are as an individual. And was there a specific instance in your life where you were like, you know what, this is kind of my calling, or were you able to have that light bulb moment almost?
Yeah, I experienced that moment, with deeper into my teaching career, because when I became a teacher, with full transparency, I liked education, but it was also something that it just felt safe and comfortable to do. And I felt, that was my own, weakness was just, if I keep it simple, then no one will find out I'm so anxious and depressed, and no one will find out that I'm using alcohol like I'm using it. It was a very safe place for me. But after a few years of teaching, I had the opportunity to teach in a performing arts academy within our school, like a little micro school. And everything was arts focused and project-based learning. And the kids were a small cohort and they traveled together. And the common denominator there was that each of those kids, didn't fit the typical pedigree of the school where I worked, which was very, affluent, athletic, well-educated parents. And these kids all had values and interests and talents that weren't really appreciated on a large scale. So it was when I got into that role that I really started understanding that my true passion was connecting with the disenfranchised, the ones that felt like they had been given up on, or even the ones that had given up on others. And then certainly after I really faced into my mental health and sobriety and started writing about it, I've written a lot of articles and done a lot of podcasts, and I'm always an open book. People can ask me anything. And the freedom of that, I just knew that the more I was sharing my story, it could maybe instill hope in somebody else who, if when I was 16, 15, or even 21, 22, I would have never thought that I would live to be 41 and have 3 kids and a successful business and be an author.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on the money with what TAD is trying to do, and providing a resource for people to come and engage with, but also connect with, right? And being able to tell a story that relates to individuals going through something that, I mean, it's the saying, it's okay not to be okay,
right?
And you're not alone, right? There are others out there that are feeling the exact same way you are. And, I applaud you for, obviously, as we hope to get TAD off the ground, we're working hard here, but, you've really spent your life devoted to this. So thank you for all the work that you've done, because you've really set a platform for, a lot of others to make a difference. So, thank you for that. But another question that I just wanted to touch base on was, before I go off and forget about it, is having 3 children.
Mm.
How are you going to approach mental health with your kids?
I mean, that's a great question. And when I say that, my call to action is to take your child to a mental health provider, like the dentist, that's something that I do, that I have activated with my 9-year-old. So I see a lot of similarities in my 9-year-old that I reflect on of myself, right? And so it makes me nervous, but I also know that the best defense is a good offense with mental health. So taking her, to see somebody, and also the schools do a much better job, elementary schools, with social emotional learning. It's actually built into their daily schedule, which I think is remarkably progressive and unique. And I've never seen it before. It's new this year. She has 45 minutes of SEL time every day, where they're just focusing on naming emotions and processing emotions and relating them to what they're learning about. The piece that worries me the most, and not only with the mental health, though, is also just like the addiction gene that can run like wildfire through family trees. So, my kids know I don't drink, and they know that I see a therapist. And so I talk about it as if it's very normal, because I want them to understand that if they ever experience those feelings or come to their own conclusions, that their dad was able to be very pragmatic about it and get through it, and also not hide it or feel like he couldn't talk about it with them.
I love what you just said there, that normal piece. I think that's extremely important. Something I definitely want to get to later. But Just one thing that I've been kind of thinking about here, and just from some of the reading that I've done on your work, well, I guess us specifically on this podcast, we've discussed the importance of verbal communication.
Mm.
But would you be able to touch on the importance of nonverbal communication for some of our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like the juxtaposition or the contrast or the congruence between your nonverbal and your verbal cues that for me is how I can really work with teenagers and young adults to see the authenticity scale, I guess is what I would call it, or vibrancy scale. We like to pretend that we're okay. It's an optics game. Because if we look well and we are trying to have happiness via osmosis. So for a long time, I thought, well, if I just play that sport, those kids seem happy, so I'll do that. And, oh, the student council kids seem great, so I think I'll do that. So I was chasing things or expecting them to like fill my cup or to calm my soul or to ease my pain. But wherever you go, there you are. And then I fell into the same trap in adulthood. If I just get this promotion, or if I just, become a principal, or even when I wrote my first book, when I took a leave of absence and wrote my first book in 2018, I thought, okay, this is it. This is going to make me happy. Those things are all things that I've appreciated and they've helped me in my career, but none of them have done anything for my mental health. So I was able to basically, fake it forever, because I have a resume or optics or a look that I go for, that you can make people think you are doing really well when you're not.
No, I appreciate that. And I think so much of our society is built on, you touched on it earlier, right? The social media. What
Right.
can people see who are not directly involved with our life? And how can we fake? Not fake, right? Because not everybody is there, but how can we make it look like our lives are more important than the next, right? Or more successful than the next? And we put so much stake into that rather than the potential moments throughout a day that you really open your eyes and you're like, wow, this is awesome, right? Like I'm really enjoying life in this moment. And I can speak to myself. We moved to Vermont. We got out of the city and we came up here and we've loved it. Not sitting in traffic, having more time to ourselves, being able to have dogs, all sorts of things that make our days that much better. So I think touching on that, it is not daily trying to not fake happiness.
Mm-hmm.
will provide more meaning to your daily life, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I tell kids all the time is you need to feel it all the way through. So that if you feel happy all of the time, that's equally dangerous as feeling badly all the time, right? So because if you feel happy all the time, you're certainly not aware of the world around you or the people around you. And I don't even think with social media it's so competitive in terms of posting to pretend. For me, it was more like, doing things that to convince myself that I was okay, right? To convince myself that I was well when I wasn't. And in high school and even in college, I refer to it as the 4.0 mask. So the juxtaposition, and this is where I have some very tough conversations with parents, because when I am working with a student and I know that they're struggling, they're abusing alcohol, they're abusing drugs, they're depressed, they're self-medicating. But when I talk to the parents, they're like, well, Daniel, he has a 4.0 and he's on varsity lacrosse and, he's in youth and government and he goes to church, so it's checking all the boxes that should indicate success, right? But if we're looking at success by a resume line item, then we're missing the true sense of what success is. It should be that marriage between, yes, those things and accomplishments and skills and activities that you love and embrace and excel at, but it also has to be blended with the true feeling of intrinsic happiness or intrinsic motivation, and making sure you're doing those things for the right reasons and that you're not chasing somebody else's goals, or you're not just trying to run from your own emotions.
And I think that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about just being able to take that time and being self-reflective and kind of understand, what kind of makes you tick, what makes you happy, and figuring out exactly who you are, right?
Absolutely. And being okay, like you said earlier, it's okay to not be okay, and you won't be okay all the time. And not feeling okay is normal, and it's expected. Where I get more stern with kind of some of my stubborn people in my life is, it does become a choice though when you refuse to face into it, or to utilize resources that are so present and readily available or free, oftentimes. Then you dug your heels in, and that's sort of its own conversation about the resistance or failure to fully recognize or admit or face into what your struggles are.
I just sort of wanted to, follow that up with, obviously there's a lot of hard work and discomfort that goes into approaching mental health, and sort of what I hope potentially our listeners can get from you would be, do you have, through your experience, do you have a coping action or a response or anything like that that can help break the stigma or make an experience less uncomfortable for individuals to sort of, who are dipping their foot in the mental health space, or dipping their foot in, like, I really need to be self-aware about my mental health, to really dive in and say, this is something, exactly what you said. I need to go see a therapist. I need to go see a counselor, like I go see my dentist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big proponent of journaling, which is funny because before basically my life before 6 years ago and my life now could be two separate movies, really. And I remember when my therapist was telling me to journal, and I was like rolling my eyes, I'm not going to journal. And she also told me to meditate, which I also rolled my eyes, and now I love to meditate. So, but back to the worry journal is, I always do like a 7-day challenge. Like, I challenge you for 7 days to, on this notebook, I want you to, if something comes across your mind that's an insecurity or a worry or a fear, I want you to just write it down in this journal. And so that you can have documentation, or you can kind of memorialize and look for patterns and look for triggers and look for people, places, things, activities that are bringing up those negative emotions in you. Same with sleep. I get a lot of kids that feel like they can't sleep. And again, I'm not a clinician, but I am a conduit, or sort of like a matchmaker, at least regionally here, because I've been working in Newport Beach in Orange County for about 17 years. So I can work with a child who is treatment resistant. Maybe they want to go see a therapist. So the parent will have them come see me, because you go see this educator. He's a life coach. He's an author. He's just going to talk to you. And then I get them to trust me, and I get them to collect their own data, so that when they go see a clinician, they're, much farther along in the process, because they can hand this information to them, and then get right into what is sort of plaguing their mind over time.
It's an interesting exercise. It's funny. I mean, you say that you rolled your eyes initially when I heard it. I mean, it seems like lately I have been hearing kind of about the effectiveness of journaling, and I think originally probably, like, your reaction probably isn't uncommon. Like, I mean, the first time that I heard about that as an exercise, I was like, okay, well, what ultimately,
Yeah.
how is that really going to help, right? But the more I hear about the process, and just having something to, even just to write down and to, that no one else can read it. It's your own thoughts, and just putting a pen to paper. And I think that's there's some therapeutic effects to that in itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I believe in my heart of hearts that pen to paper journaling is the most cathartic and, you know, I guess healthiest for me, most effective healthy coping skill. And I mix it up. I'm always working with a coach or a therapist, and right now I work with a business coach who's a kind of a business life coach named Hillary, and she challenged me to do a 22-day journal. So it was 22 questions, and you answered each one for 3 minutes, 22 days in a row. And each question is different. But at the end of it, and you set a timer for 3 minutes, you write as much as you can for 3 minutes, and you stop when it's done. At the end of the 22 days, you have this wealth of thought and reflection that is intentional. And I think that's the difference between intentional reflection and passive or reactive reflection. Sure, we all reflect, like when we're driving in the car or in the shower or doing the dishes or something. We reflect in moments of like chaos or mundane activities, but it doesn't land anywhere. Your thoughts go down the shower drain with water. But if you get it down on paper, it forces you to go back and look at it and chew on it and think about it and better understand what kind of help you might need from it.
Yeah, and stop me if I've misunderstood, but as Lawson started talking about, the rolling of the eyes and all of that, I mean, through my personal experience, sort of as soon as I became self-aware that something was off, something was not right, I expected to go to a counselor and be fixed immediately, right? Like you mentioned that magic pill.
Right.
And I think what you're getting at is this is hard work.
Yeah.
Right? Like you need to wake up knowing that you're gonna have to be intentional. You're gonna have to work hard at this. You're gonna have to put time and effort. You're gonna have to be open and honest with yourself. And you wanna know what? It's at the end of the day, you still might go to bed feeling like tired, right? But the next day you wake up and, hey, I'm going to continue to battle this. And it's sort of the drive to, it can work. Right. And I think you're living proof that with enough hard work and effort, this doesn't need to be the moment of your life that, steers you in a negative direction or not the direction that you hope to be in.
Yeah. I think a passive posture leads to a passive life. When, with something like journaling for 3 minutes, I always encourage bite-sized coping skills, like, a 3-minute meditation or a 3-minute journal or remembering to breathe. If you have your Apple Watch, it will tell you to breathe. It'll tell you to stand up. Like those little things over time compound into big change. To the reverse, negative coping skills or ignoring those things compound into big, like negative results over time. We don't notice them either way right away. Sometimes I feel people don't want to go to therapy because they're imagining that they have to go and just like let it all out at once, and it's going to be this, just big experience, when really, there's power in just dripping it over time and building that relationship. So I encourage people who are looking for a way to get going, think about small wins. What are some small wins, some small action items that you could commit to for a 5-day challenge or a 7-day challenge or a 1-month challenge? Rather than thinking like, oh, I have to do all this work, I'm a broken person and I have to fix it. Because despite, my success that I've had, and I don't think I'm a big deal, but I think I've done well, and I've been able to like put a little bit of a footprint in this space, in the conversation. I mean, even yesterday I had a very hard day. Last night it was a very hard night for me. But I just go back to basics, back to the toolkit, and sort of like work my way through it and then reset today.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that our listeners now hopefully will have a few exercises and a course of action to take on those days, and maybe not even just on those days where they're not feeling quite themselves, but just kind of a daily practice
Right.
for them. But yeah, I think we'll probably start to wrap it up here a little bit. But I think one question that Nick and I usually like to ask the guests that we have on, because it can sometimes be a daunting task for individuals, and like we've touched on, it can often be an uncomfortable and difficult conversation. But how would you talk to someone or ask someone about their mental health?
I mean, if you were concerned for them.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you had a friend or a family member, and one thing that we've kind of touched on a few times is that a lot of times, unless you've gone through your own personal challenges, or you have been in a situation before with a friend or family member, a lot of the times you're just not quite sure if there's a wrong way to approach things, if there's a right way to approach things.
I think the wrong way to approach it is to not approach it. And I wrote about this in my book because, and I say this lovingly, as I love my family and I love my friends, but I in the course of what I would say was complete chaos and disarray emotionally, mentally, and from a substance use perspective for me, I can quite literally remember only 2 people ever asking me straight up if I had an issue with my mental health and needed any support, or if I had an issue with my alcohol and I needed any help, right? And the first was when I was in college, and they got really defensive and very dismissive, and because I knew she was right, And then the second was, when I was still an assistant principal, but I hadn't lost my friend yet, and I hadn't quit. And I responded much differently to that. So sometimes we're so worried about hurting someone's feelings. But a therapist I know named Tori has a saying, which I love, which is say what you mean, but don't say it mean. So you got to figure out how to approach it without being aggressive. For me, a turn off for me just personally is like, how are you doing, or what's wrong? Those aren't necessarily ways to do it. I like to sort of ease into the conversation and maybe ask them to tell me about a few things in your life that you feel really happy about, and tell me about something in your life that I might be able to help you with, improve, or connect you with somebody. Just try to make it casual. And then also, vulnerability is contagious. So if you lead with your own struggle, and if you lead with your own vulnerability or deficits, people reciprocate, and they take that as a disarming invitation to trust you, right? Because you've spilled a little tea on the napkin, and then they can pay, then they can pour their tea right back next to yours.
And I think that's an awesome way to wrap this up. I think we're all for vulnerability, and, for ourselves, being, masculine and being vulnerable, like that's being a man to Lawson and I, right? And, that's what we're trying to emulate. And I know that, for us, we encourage everybody to check in on their friends, check in on their family. And even if you don't think that something's going on, hey, how you doing? How have things been? This has been a really difficult time for a lot of people. And, this is something that I've gone through. Like, I think that's great advice for everybody to take, whether mental health is on their, on the forefront of their minds or not. And, if it's not, I think just having a way to check in with people goes a long way. So I think, Lawson, do you have anything else?
Well, I think that's it. We've covered a bunch, and we've certainly enjoyed having you on here, Daniel. I know we'll have some listeners. Like I said, we'll have some exercises they could practice themselves, or some habits. And you shared a lot of great information. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, and thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. I appreciate the work that you guys are doing and your mission and your voice. And I'm always down to help in any way to get more people involved in this collective social, moral, and ethical, I think, need for us to face into this and stop dancing around the topic. So thank you so much.